What we are about to watch or listen to is from the British Museum, and it will depict and debunk two ideas that have been made up in this world. The first idea is that Berbers never mixed with Saharan or sub Saharan Africans, and the second one is that Africans never used the wheel. So let's just get straight to the reading. Chariots in the Sahara. A number of sites from this collection are located in the Libyan desert, notably the Fezzan region, and include paintings of chariots in a variety of forms, dating to the horse period from up to 3,000 years ago. This has stimulated some interesting questions about the use of chariots in what appears to be such a seemingly inappropriate environment for a wheeled vehicle, as well as the nature of representation. Why were chariots used in the desert, and why were they represented in such different ways? And as you can see here, there it is in a cave showing someone driving a chariot with some animal, probably a cow or a horse. The chariot has been one of the great empowering innovations of history. It likely originated in Mesopotamia about 3000 BC due to advances in metallurgy during the Bronze Age and has served as a primary means of transport until quite recently. In the historical period across Africa, Eurasia, and Europe, chariots provided rapid and efficient transport and were ideal for the battlefield, as the design provided a raised firing platform for archers. As a result, the chariot became the principal war machine, from the Egyptians through to the Romans and the Chinese, who owned an army of 10,000 chariots. Indeed, our use of the word car is derived of the Latin word carus, meaning a chariot of war or of triumph. And you can see their Sumerian version of it, or Akkadian, okay, Neo-Assyrian. The chariot in the Sahara was probably introduced by the Garamantes, a cultural group thought to be descended from Berbers and Saharan pastoralists. Now, I want you to keep that in mind, that what they're saying, from Berbers and Saharan pastoralists, meaning that the Saharan pastoralists are not Berbers. They're something else. This is going to be very important when we read other texts about the Garamantes. There is little textual information about the Garamantes. Documentation comes mainly from the Greek and Roman sources. Herodotus described them as a very great nation. Recent archaeological research has shown that the Garamantes established about 8 major towns, as well as numerous other settlements, and were brilliant farmers, resourceful engineers, and enterprising merchants. The success of the Garamantes was based on their subterranean water extraction system, a network of underground tunnels allowing the Garamantian culture to flourish in an increasingly arid environment, resulting in population expansion, urbanization, and conquest. And you can see here another chariot with Africans basically ritualizing a so-called flying gallop chariot. Now, you can see here that they're trying to give the impression that these people don't know what they're doing, and that these chariots are probably from hearsay. But let's first carry on reading. On average, there are about 500 drawings of chariots across the Sahara, from the Fezzan in Libya through the Air of Niger into northern Mali, and then westwards to the Atlantic coast. But not all were produced by the Garamantes. It is still not certain that the chariots were driven along the routes where where their depiction occurs. Remains of chariots have never been found west of the Fezzan, However, the Fezzan states were thriving trade routes, and chariots are likely to have been used to transport salt, cloth, beads, and metal goods in exchange for gold, ivory, and slaves. The widespread occurrence of chariot imagery on Saharan rock outcrop has led to the proposition of chariot routes linking North and West Africa. Let's pause there for a second. Because you see the chariot imagery in West Africa on cave art from 3,000 years ago, and you see the same thing in North Africa, it shows that these two places were linked. Now, I want you to keep that in mind. It's going to be important when we talk about the words that they used in North Africa and West Africa. However, these vehicles were not suited for long distance transport across desert terrain. More localized use is probable, conducted through middlemen who were aware of the trade routes through the desert landscape. Additionally, the horse at the time was a prestige animal, and it is unlikely that they facilitated transport across the Sahara trade routes, with travelers rather utilizing donkeys or oxen. And you can see here, there's a chariot with a donkey on it, or not a donkey, a cow, because you can see it's got horns. Very faint, but you can see them. The absence of archaeological evidence for chariots has led to the suggestion that some representation of chariots may have been the result of cultural diffusion transmitted orally by nomadic peoples traversing the region. Artists may never have actually seen the vehicles themselves. Now, before we carry on, I want us to go back up and look at these chariots. Does this look like something that you would have heard about? This looks quite clear that this person knows what he's doing, but some people, you know, they have a need to dismiss things. Okay, so artists may never have actually seen the vehicles themselves in this case, and if this is the case, chariot symbols may have acquired some special meaning above their function as modes of transport. It may also explain why some representations of chariots do not seem to conform to more conventional styles of representation, and account for the different ways in which they were depicted. These two images above depict chariots as if flattened out, with the horses represented back to back. Now, the funny part here is this is just a 2D image, but everything seems to line up with chariots. They're using this as an example of people who never saw the horse. And you can see it's in Libya, the same place where you see this, which means these people are very aware of what they're doing or talking about. Another one, another one, possible chariots, another one. Two images may or may not depict chariots. The rectangular shapes are potentially abstracted from forms of the chariots, similar to the flattened out depictions. Discussions previously, these potential abstracted representations often sit alongside distinguished figures, such as geometric bitriangular figures, spears or lances, women wearing long dresses, and animals drawn in a fairly naturalistic style of the horse period when the chariots were being used. Besides the schematic and simply depicted chariots, there is also a group which has been termed the flying gallop chariots. Their distribution includes the whole Tassel region, although there are fewer in the Caucasus Mountains. They resemble the classical two-wheeled antique chariots generally drawn by two horses, but sometimes three or even four. The driver is usually alone and is depicted in a style with a stick head. The majority are shown at full speed with the driver holding a whip, standing on a small platform, sometimes straining forward. And here it is, flying gallop. In a similar manner, it is the schematic chariots, the flying gallop depictions display the entire platform and both wheels of the chariot. In addition, more than one horse is depicted as a single horse in profile, with numerous legs indicating multiple horses, an artistic technique first seen during the Upper Paleolithic in Europe. Interestingly, in the Libyan rock art of the Caucasus Mountains, it seemed that animals could be conceived of in profile and in movement, but chariots were conceived of differently and are represented in plain view, seen from above or in three-quarter perspective. So, before we go deeper into this, let's first consider what we've read. 3,000 years ago, which is 2000 BC, there were wheels as far as West Africa. And secondly, wait a minute, isn't West Africa 2000 BC when farming started in West Africa? Coincidence? I don't know. But what I will say is that not only do we see this, but we see a fusion between Berbers and Saharans. And yes, black people lived in the Sahara Desert. In the desert, just there. All you need is water if you're black to live in the desert. And they still live in the desert today, the Sahara Desert. As we read earlier, the Garamantes are responsible for the chariots. So who exactly are the Garamantes? Well, if we read Ptolemy in the second century, he says, at the outset, when writing of the journey of the Garama to Ethiopia, he says that Septimus Flaccus, having set out from Libya with his army, came to the land of the Ethiopians from the land of Garamantes in the space of 3 months by journeying continuously southward. He says furthermore that Julius Maternus, setting out from Leptis Magna and Garama with the king of the Garamantes, who was beginning an expedition against the Ethiopians by bearing continuously southward, came within 4 months to Agasimbia, the country of the Ethiopians, where the rhinoceros is to be found. Each of these statements on the face of it is incredible. First, because the Ethiopians are not so far distant from the Garamantes as to require a 3 month journey, seeing that the Garamantes are themselves, for the most part, Ethiopians and have the same king. Secondly, because it is ridiculous to think that the king should march through regions subject to him only in a southerly direction, when the inhabitants of those regions are scattered widely east and west. Now, I want you to put that in your pipe and smoke it, because if we look at this, it's not just claiming that the Garamantes, for the most part, which means some part of it is not Ethiopian. It's not just claiming that the Garamantes are Ethiopians. It's also claiming that the Garamantes own parts of Ethiopia itself, and it's also claiming that the Garamantes are so large that they span east and west, another claim which is backed up by Herodotus. Herodotus says that the Garamantes are a very large nation. So we're talking about an Ethiopian tribe here that used chariots, and according to the British Museum and now this, they go all the way down south to the Ethiopian regions. And we're talking here when we say Ethiopia, because it says Agasimbia, we're talking about West Africa. Now, to get a broader view, we have to look at another person, which the person we're going to look at now is Strabo, and he writes, okay, he says, above the coastline, which extends from Carthage to Cathale and to the land of Mycenaeans, lies the land of the Libo Phoenicians, which extends to the mountainous country of the Gaetulians, where Libya begins. The land above the Gaetulians is that of the Garamantes, which lies parallel to the former, and is the land whence the Carthaginian stones are brought. The Garamantes are said to be distant from the Ethiopians, who live on the ocean a 9 or 10 days' journey, and from Amun 15 between the Gaetulians and or seaboard. So judging by maps of the Garamanti territory, we are talking about a really, really large region. We're talking about from the regions of Egypt, as you can see here, it says Lepis Magna, which was what was described, and you see Garamanti starts over there, and they talk about it going all the way through, and you can see in this map they put the Garamantes in the Sahara, and of course you can see that the Garamanti spread all the way to West Africa. So that's why they say it's huge. And if you check the number, like the Berbers, which are described, if you see how small their territories would be compared to the Garamantes, you're talking about just the tippity tip of the world. And even if you look at the Roman provinces, they're not that big.